aboard the St. Louis, bound for...
Yeah, well, we were bound for Cuba. And it was, I don't remember getting on the ship, but I remember as we were leaving, you know, as we started sailing, and I don't remember what I felt, but I remember my parents sort of heaving this sigh of relief, as if this tremendous weight had been lifted from their shoulders, and of course it had. Anyway, the trip to Cuba took approximately two weeks, as a matter of fact. We got there on May the 27th. And I remember some of the things. There was a swimming pool there. I remember playing with kids and swimming in the pool. And we were treated beautifully. It was an amazing thing. The Germans in Germany treated us like dirt. I mean, attacked us, spit on us. You couldn't go into a. I mean, they used to have signs on the stores, Juden und Hunde unerwünscht, which means Jews and dogs are requested not to come in. So it was horrible. And yet on this ship, which was manned by Germans and had a German captain, it was a German ship, we were treated as if we were, you know, just normal passengers. I mean, it was surrealistic. The reason, I think, was, and from the reading that I've done about this voyage, the reason was that the captain of the ship was really a decent guy. And he apparently ordered the crew, among which there were apparently some Nazis. I guess they had some Nazis on every ship and so on, just to make sure that nothing untoward, as far as they were concerned, happened. Anyway, he ordered all the crewmen to treat us as if we were just ordinary people. So it was wonderful. We were on a cruise. We ate, danced, there was music, there were movies. I mean, it was fantastic. And we got to Cuba on the 27th of May. It was, I don't know what, I think it was a Friday. And we got there in the late afternoon, and the boat didn't dock. It stayed in the harbor. And as soon as it stopped in the harbor, people began to be afraid. They felt that there was something wrong. And they were right, because of course I didn't realize this, nobody realized it at the time, but apparently what had happened, even before the ship sailed, the entry permits that we had gotten, that we had actually bought, that the Cuban government had issued, I guess the Minister of Immigration had issued these entry permits, were invalidated. The president of Cuba had gotten the legislature to pass a law that these permits were invalid, and that from now on you could only enter Cuba if you had a valid visa, which had to be issued by not only the Department of Immigration, but other departments. I don't know the details. And so there we were in the harbor. The next day, we just stood there. And of course, then the rumors really were rampant that we weren't going to be allowed to disembark, and that we were going to have to go back to Germany. People were already, I mean, at this early stage, in a real panic. My two aunts and uncles and my cousin who had lived in Berlin until a few months before, were already in Cuba. And of course, many of the passengers on the ship also had relatives in Cuba. What these relatives, including mine, did was they hired these little fishing boats so they could, so they could come close to the ship and And so there was this parade of fishing boats going around the ship, and there was this yelling. You know, people would yell. They would spot their relatives, and they would yell to each other, "Hello," you know. And I remember once we noticed that the ship that my aunts and uncles and my cousin were on was near our cabin. So we ran down to the cabin, we opened the porthole, and sure enough, they were right there. And we were able to actually talk to them. And we had brought some gifts for them. So my mother threw these gifts to them on the boat, and she said, "God only knows if we'll be able to give them to you otherwise." I remember yelling. I remember spotting my cousin another day on one of these boats, and I was yelling to her. And I remember some lady was standing next to me, and she said to me, "Why don't you shut up? I have more important things to tell to my relatives." Well, I think I'm bitter about that episode, I suppose. I can't be bitter about the United States. I think it's a fantastic country. But, you know, just like every country and like every person, they make mistakes. And I think this was a dreadful mistake. You know, I went to the library downtown, and I looked up the New York Times from 1939 when we were on the ship. And of course there were editorials and there were front page articles written in the Times about this. Of course, I was fascinated to read this. As a matter of fact, I made copies of these articles. And it's amazing. There were editorials in the Times saying how terrible it was that, you know, what was happening in Germany and how terrible it was for Cuba not to let us in. But there wasn't one whisper in those editorials about the United States letting us in. I mean, it was incredible to read those articles.